Now we're going to do section 3.4, which is talking about price controls. So price controls are laws that governments use to regulate prices. So the government's like, hey, that price is too high, it needs to be lower. So I'm going to lower it, make you lower your prices. The government comes in and just takes control over the market. So there's a lot of controversy around price controls, especially for goods that are like necessities or for protecting businesses. So there's a big difference in opinion on a lot of these. So let's go into the different kinds, and then we'll kind of touch on a little bit about the efficiency of them. So the first one is price ceilings. So price ceilings keep a price from rising above a certain level. It is a legal maximum price that one pays for some good or service. So basically the government's like, hey, this is the maximum price. This is the ceiling. And you can't go above the ceiling, right? So if I'm in a room, right, can I go above the ceiling? No, right? Like there's a wall there, I can't go above it. So that is what a price ceiling is. Now, can I go below the ceiling? Yes, right? Because here I am, I'm below the ceiling. So just because there's a maximum price on something, that doesn't mean you have to charge that. Because where does the market always go to? The market always goes to equilibrium. So just because that's the maximum doesn't mean you have to charge it. You can charge anything below it. You just can't go above it. What is a price floor? A price floor keeps a price from falling below a certain level. It is the lowest price that one can legally pay for some good or service. So you can't go below the floor. And that's right, because look at where I'm standing. I'm standing on the floor. I'm not falling through it. Okay? I'm standing on the floor. So I can't go below the floor. That's what the idea behind the price floor is that you just can't do a price below it. Can you do a price above the price floor? Of course, right? Because here I am. I'm standing on the floor. So I could charge a price anything above it. So that's the thinking behind price controls is like, hey, here's the maximum, or hey, there's the minimum. You can do anything you want, but as long as it's not below that. You can do anything you want as long as it's below that. So let's go a little bit more into them. So price ceilings. Governments use these to keep the price of necessary goods and services affordable. So this is where I was talking about where the necessity goods, where a lot of consumers are like, hey, why are you charging so much for this? I need it cheaper because it's necessary for me. Just because you think it's necessary and I really need it, I'm going to have more demand for something because it's a necessity, right? I don't want to pay a higher price for necessities. And the government's like, okay, fine, let's put a maximum price on it. So this could be the price of water bottles before a hurricane that hits Florida, right? Because what's happening with expectations? There's a hurricane coming. I need water. So I need to buy it today, which increases my demand today, which increases the price, right? But that's a necessity. So consumers are kind of like, well, I don't want to pay a higher price for things that I need. Can we put a maximum price on this? Another example would be rent control in New York, Washington, D.C., or San Francisco. So basically, if we're going back to necessities, right, shelter is a necessity. So in these places, they put rent control. You cannot go above this price on rent. But what happens to the apartment market when more people move to New York and start their new careers? Okay, so what's happening? We're having more people move in, more people buying, more buyers, more population. Because there's more buyers, what happens to demand? Demand will increase. Okay, but what's happening here is we have the supply and demand, and here is the market. So P0, Q0. And then the government says, okay, fine, this is the price ceiling. So guess what? Price ceiling says you can't go above the ceiling, so this is the maximum price. But when we have more people moving in, we're going to have an increase in the demand. And because we have an increase in demand, what happened to price? Well, price goes up and quantity goes up as well. But we can't go above this price, right? P0 is the maximum. We cannot go above it. So what does that mean? Well, we are having this many people supplying, right? Because that's the quantity. And we're having this many people demanding. If you're confused about that, okay, look at the new demand and look at the price. This is the price ceiling, right? We cannot go above here, so this is the price. And then here is my new demand. So this is my new quantity. But where my supply is, my S0 at this price is at Q0. So we're having a situation where there's going to be more demand than there is supply. So what does that mean? Do we have a surplus or a shortage? You're having too many people buying things. It's a shortage. Now, when we're talking about rent control and we're talking about shortages, what does that mean? Well, that would mean you don't have enough apartments. And if you don't have enough apartments and you have more people, what does that mean? Homelessness will be increasing. So that is one argument against having something like rent control, is that it will only benefit the first ones to move into the apartments, right? Because look at where we started. We started at Q0, which was equilibrium. So everybody that wanted an apartment got one. But because we have more people, we needed more apartments. But because of the rent control, we couldn't supply more. So therefore, the rest will have to find somewhere else to live. Businesses do not have the incentive to have higher quality, so then apartment quality is likely to decrease. The basic idea here is that if the price of apartments were to go up, right, we talked about how maybe firms would supply more, have more quantity supplied, which is great, right? So then they would have more apartments, maybe they would have more money to put into it. And so because of the price ceiling, there's nothing incentivizing the firms to do any kind of upkeep on quality, because this is the maximum price they can charge. So, I'm not going to try and do more. For instance, if there was an apartment that says, hey, let's have the new technology, let's have new furniture, let's have new stuff, that's going to be very expensive to do. So what would happen to the price of trying to do that apartment? The price would go up. But because of rent control, right, they want to charge it up here, but the rent control says here. So do apartments want to do this now? Do they want to put all this money into an apartment if they're only going to get this? No. So they're only going to do this amount of quality for their apartments. So that is where the lower quality might come in on the price ceilings. Let's talk about price floors. Well, the most popular example of a price floor is the minimum wage. $7.25 an hour is the federal minimum wage, but some states do have a higher minimum. So we'll talk about a little bit more about what a higher minimum looks like right now. So floors are also used to protect farmers against income fluctuations, and it's another way the government helps is buying the farmer's product to keep the price higher by adding to the demand. So let's start with minimum wage first. So here, let's say we have the demand and the supply, and the government says here is the price floor. So it's $7.25. And again, right, here I am on the floor, okay? I can't go below it. And where does the market always go to? Equilibrium. Can I get to equilibrium? No. So I'm only here stuck at the floor. So this is what we're having. At this point, is that the quantity demanded or the quantity supplied? If I were to follow down, it's the demand. So this point is the quantity demanded. And if I were to keep going, this point is the quantity supplied, because it's the supply curve. So what's happening here? We're having too much supply. So that would be a surplus. We're having too much supply, surplus. And that makes sense, right? Because the price is higher, And if the price is higher, more people are wanting to sell things, so more quantity supplied. But the law of demand says at higher prices, you're going to have less quantity demanded. So more quantity supplied, less quantity demanded, surplus. Now, what does a surplus look like when we're talking about minimum wage? Well, a surplus of people wanting to work because of a higher wage, but firms don't want to pay higher wages for hiring people. So you're going to have more people wanting to work, less people getting hired, so we're going to have unemployment. So that's one example of a surplus with minimum wage. The other example is going to be for farmers. So farmers have basically good seasons and bad seasons. If they have a good season, that would mean more supply, price goes down, and then it's like, well, then we're kind of losing some profits for farmers, and that's its own thing. And then if we have less, like a drought, we're going to have an increase in prices, and that's its own thing. But the main thing with the price floor is basically, hey, the price will not go below here. So this is what you're guaranteed. And this is great for farmers because they can earn the higher prices. But the thing is that it's going to lead to a surplus because not everybody's going to be buying the corn at this higher price. So we're going to have a surplus of corn. So what does the government do at this point? They have an excess of corn or some other good. What do they do with it? Most of the time what they'll do is they will pay the farmers for this surplus. They say, you know what, hey, here you go, here's some money, I'll buy the surplus from you. And then the government can do whatever they want with the surplus. What they'll do is maybe they'll sell it to another country, maybe they'll make some sort of government program out of it, or maybe they'll just destroy it. So that's what the government does with the surplus sometimes. Other times what they'll do is they'll put a price floor at whatever it is, and they'll even try and help out the farmers by saying, you know what, here you go, here's some money, and we'll take care of the rest. So that's the whole thing about price floors. Some economists that are in high-income areas of the world, such as US, Europe, and Japan, they spend about $1 billion per day to support farmers by buying up the excess supply. So the farmers do benefit, but where does the government get their money? The taxes. So the taxpayers do have the extra cost of this. Some people might not be happy by, thinking like, well, I never buy corn. Why are my tax dollars going to corn? So sometimes what the what the government will do is they will pay farmers to not farm. Because if it might be cheaper to pay them to not farm than to grow excess supply. And that does happen. So they'll actually say, like, you know what, hey, if we pay you not to farm, that'll save us some money, but you get money. So, and we'll go more into that if you want to learn more about it. It's pretty interesting. But that's the whole idea behind price floors and ceilings, is that we are going to be having some sort of situation where price ceilings are going to change the amount of goods bought or supplied. So we have the demand, the supply, price ceiling is here. So here I am, I'm below the ceiling. This is my quantity supplied. This is my quantity demanded. So this, surplus or shortage. Am I buying too much or am I supplying too much? I'm buying too much, that's a shortage. And then here is my equilibrium, PE. The market wants to go up. It wants to go to equilibrium, but it can't. And a price floor is going to be this situation here. Price, quantity, demand, supply. This is the equilibrium here. But the government says you have to charge this price here. And here we are, and we are on top of the floor. We can't go to equilibrium. So this is a surplus, because here's my quantity demanded, Here's my quantity supplied. Too much supply is a surplus. Now, if you're wondering, can they charge a price below the floor? No. Can they charge a price above the floor? Of course they can, right? Because if they wanted to, pay this price here, I can see the price. So if I can see it, I can charge it, I can buy it, right? But what about that? If the businesses were to try and increase the price, no one's going to buy it. So what should they do? They should lower their price. So that's why it always works to equilibrium as close as possible. For a price ceiling, right? You can charge below the price ceiling, and that's great. But what's going to happen? Well, at lower prices, you're going to have nobody wanting to supply. So we need to increase the price back to as close to equilibrium as possible. So what are we going to do next is we're going to talk about the efficiency. So when we're talking about efficiency, we're trying to talk about benefiting consumers and producers at the same time. So consumer surplus is the amount that individuals would have been willing to pay minus the amount they actually paid. So what it is that area between your demand curve and the market price. So for example, here's the equilibrium. You are willing to pay this much for this quantity. The way I like to think about it was the water bottles in the desert. I'm willing to pay $1 million for one water bottle in the desert. But if they're only charging me $1, then I'm having a savings or surplus of this amount here. Because that's all I have to pay is the price, but I'm willing to pay more for it. And that's what the demand curve is saying, is that I'm willing to pay more for it, but I don't have to. So this red triangle here is my consumer surplus. Okay, CS. Now producer surplus is the price that producers actually receive minus what they were willing to accept. So what does that mean? That means the supply is willing to sell at this price here. Like, hey, you know what? At this price, I'll sell this much. So this is how much they're willing to sell. But can they sell it for more? Yes. So that right here is going to be your producer surplus, because it's how much extra you are earning for selling. So this is our producer surplus. So at equilibrium, this is where we have the maximum amount of consumer surplus and producer surplus. This is where it's best for both people. So social surplus is where we're going to add these two together. That is their economic surplus, or the social surplus is right here, is where you're adding them together. And that is the highest amount of surplus you can get. So all you need to know is that it's the top triangle is the consumer surplus and the bottom triangle is the producer surplus. If I were to ask you calculate consumer surplus, what shape is that? A triangle. So right here, right, we would talk about, well, what's the height of that triangle and what's the base of that triangle? And then all we would do is the area of a triangle, which is 1/2 base times the height. And the same thing with producer surplus. We would start at this height here and go over the width, and we could calculate the area of a triangle, find the producer surplus, and then that's how we can add them together to find the total surplus. Well, what about deadweight loss? Deadweight loss is essentially money that is just gone. You'll never get it back. The loss in social surplus that occurs when a market produces an inefficient quantity. Basically, you're not at equilibrium, so you are losing surplus somewhere. And that definitely happens where we're talking about price ceilings. Because what's happening? You're not at equilibrium. So if you're not at equilibrium, you are having less quantity being sold, right? Because that is how much quantity you're having. People want to buy more. They want to buy here, but they can't. So they have to buy this quantity. So here is your consumer surplus. Right here. Nothing changes here, right? Because that is the price that you're paying for it. But what did change is the quantity that you can buy. Producer surplus is this area down here, because again, it's the difference between your price and the supply curve. So that stays the same as well. But what is this triangle right here? This triangle out front is my deadweight loss, because the best situation is going to be at equilibrium, but I can't get there. So this is my deadweight loss. And here's my consumer surplus. Here's my producer surplus. And that's how it goes there. Let's look at a price floor real quick. If I were to do a price floor, it would be here. So this is the amount that we're buying. If you're wondering why are we doing here, at this price, that's the first curve I hit. So whatever the first curve you hit, that is the amount that is either bought or sold. So this quantity demand is the amount that is bought. So this area right here is my consumer surplus, and because we're selling here at this quantity, and this is my supply curve, this entire area right here is my producer surplus. So this is CS and PS. And then therefore this area right here is my deadweight loss, because that's where I want to be, but I'm not. So this is the amount of surplus that we're losing. Okay? So that is both situations in terms of efficiency. Right? So the best situation is going to be where we're at equilibrium, where we're having surplus and producer surplus for consumers and producers. But because you're changing the market to not be at equilibrium, you will have inefficiency. You will be losing surplus. And that is happening right here. We're going to be practicing this a lot. If you have any questions about this, please let me know, and I'll guide you through it again. So, based off of that information, okay, everything we've learned so far in terms of opportunity cost, scarcity, demand and supply, the market, everything we did so far, all of that was so we could learn the basic economic questions. Okay, the way I like to think about it is, if I had an island, okay, what would be the first thing I would have to do for my citizens? Well, what do I need? Well, I need to eat. So, well, what do we have to eat? That's the first question. What to produce? And that's great because, okay, let's say we're looking at the island and we see we have bananas, we see we have rice fields, we see we have different things that we can use. But then the question becomes, how do we get the bananas down from the trees? How do we get the rice into bags? Things like that. So the question is, how do we produce? We need to figure out what we have, and then we need to figure out how do we get it. And the next thing is, okay, once we have it in, like once we have rice in a bag, right? Who gets it? Who gets the goods? So those are the three questions right there. What, how, and who. Those are the three economic questions that we need to solve. We use the production possibilities to figure out the what and the how, and then we're going to use supply and demand to figure out who gets it. We already know where, because if I have an island and I'm trying to figure out where do we produce, here, right? We know that one. Another question could come up is when. Okay, well, I mean, if I want to eat, right, when? Now. Right, and if you want to add in why, okay, just go back to, okay, well, why do I want to eat? Well, I want to live. So we're not using economics to understand the where, when, and why. We're using economics to figure out the what, how, and who. That's what we're really trying to do. These questions are the driving force for the market, because if consumers want something, then the market could supply it, and it has to figure out how to do it. Okay, and that's how we use economics. So that's going to be the end of chapter 3. On the next chapter, we'll be talking about labor markets and financial markets. All right, so I'll see you there. Bye.